Hey, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Bravo. Now, if you haven't seen the release video for the FT Bravo, it's part of a 3-part jet series designed by an amazing FT STEM class. Now, what FT STEM is it's a curriculum from K through 12 that teaches kids how to solve problems through aviation. We challenged a great group of students from the Mesa Foam Fighters, one of our key FT STEM schools, to design an interchangeable winged prop and slot jet. They blew us out of the water with 3 jets, 3 fuselages that all interchanged to make 9 different combinations. This is just one of them. Now, the special thing about this project, when you go to our store and support us by buying it, we take a portion of those profits and we put it over to fund future FT STEM schools, so education through aviation can be seen in a whole bunch of different schools all across the nation. Now, if you haven't already, get your materials in order. We'll get started. As always, we have free downloadable plans for you. In this portion of the build, we're going to be showing you how to build the power pod, mount the motor, install the ESC, and make sure your motor is spinning in the proper direction. Now, before we get started on the main portion of our build, the first thing we're going to want to assemble is our power pod. This portion right here, along with the firewall, is our power pod. This is going to carry our motor and ESC, and also interchange from many of the other mini swappables. An easy tip for not cutting through the paper is to dull the very tip of your knife. Now, you can do this by rubbing it over a piece of sandpaper, or just simply take it down to the floor and drag it on the concrete a couple times. Don't do this if you have carpet. To get started with our power pod, we're first going to do a light score down through our 2 score lines. Now, if you're scratch building, this is going to be indicated by a red line. Just take the blade down close to the paper, but don't go through it. We're going to fold 180 degrees over and peel off the foam. We're going to do this on both sides. Right, now that our cavities are cleared out, we're going to go ahead and do an A-fold. An A-fold is where the side cheeks go above the bottom plate. To practice this move for gluing, we're going to keep the side plate firmly against the table and rotate the bottom plate 90 degrees while pushing down firmly on the table. This is going to give us a nice clean 90-degree edge with the bottom plate below the side plate. Once we practice that move, we're going to put a thin bead of glue, starting and stopping the bead of glue about a 1/4 inch from the edge. Once we have that, we're going to rotate 90 degrees and we're going to hold it there for about 45 seconds. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. We're going to focus the main portion of glue on an A-fold on the bottom of the side plate. That way we get most of the strength in our joint and not on the paper. Once again, our side plate is on the bottom. Rotate it 90 degrees and hold for 45 seconds. At this point, we're ready to glue on our firewall. For reference on what side we glue the firewall, we're going to look at what direction the A is pointing to. On many of our little mini models, we have quite a degree of right thrust, and we want to be able to keep that to keep the performance good. On different models, it may be pointing towards a flat 90-degree angle, and that will be on things like the Arrow and the Sparrow. Once we have the side that we need, we're going to put a healthy bead of glue on the very top surface. And we're going to drop our firewall in. While that's drying, we're going to take off about 5 inches of packing tape. And we're going to go right over the top, centering it up, pushing down towards the sides. This is going to be where all your strength is coming from, not from the glue. So don't neglect this step or your motor is going to pop off in flight or during an impact on the ground. Just like wrapping a gift for Christmas, we're going to cut 2 little reliefs. We're going to fold the edges in. Now we can go back and cut off any excess that we may have. Now at this point, it's very important that we remove the tape from the center section and also where our screw holes are going to be. If we don't remove this tape, the shaft of the motor is going to rub against that and it's going to cause it to bind and make you think that you have an ESC or a motor problem. It's easy to overheat the ESC if you don't do this step and destroy it. So now our center hole is opened up, and I've also relieved both the bigger holes for the 2204 motor. Now this mini power pod can carry an 1806 A pack or a 2204 motor, which is the B pack right here. The 1806 will use the two thinner holes that are vertical. The 2204 will use the horizontal holes that are bigger. Now I'm going to install the F pack or the 2204 motor right now. This motor is real nice. It even comes with a little Allen wrench for you to use. We're going to take this apart. Notice we have bullet connectors, so there's no soldering needed. We make sure that every power pack that we carry in our store has bullet connectors, so it's just plug and play. You don't need to solder. Now I want to take special attention towards these screws. You're going to notice a couple of these screws are shorter than the other ones. This is very important. We want to separate the long and the short screws from each other and get the long screws completely out of the picture. Reason being is we're only going to use the short screws in this step. Now this is the same for the A pack as well. If you run the long screws through the firewall, it's going to hit the windings and it's going to cause the motor to short out and potentially destroy your motor and your ESC and void your warranty. So make sure you separate these screws right now. With our short screws isolated and ready to be used, I'm going to go ahead and just open up these holes just a little bit. I'm actually going to just use the tip of my Allen wrench here. And with a little twisting motion, just open it up a touch. This is going to make installing our motors even easier. There we go. If you have any hot glue in the back, just knock that out of the way. Make sure your screws can pass through nice and easy. We're going to go ahead and pre-thread our short screw. Notice I'm saying short a lot. It's because it's so important. Most of the time when you have a motor or ESC problem, it's because too long the screws have come in and hit the windings on the motor, or that you have tape in the center section. I'm going to screw this down to just bring it out maybe a half a millimeter, just enough for the threads to engage with the motor. I'm going to do that on both sides. There we go. Now the motor has two spacings. It has a short width and a long width. I believe this is 16 millimeters and this is 19 millimeters. We're going to focus on the portion that's 16 millimeters. We're going to wiggle it around until it centers up right over those screws. There, you kind of hear it pop in there. Now we're going to go back and forth just a half turn at a time until we feel both screws engaging. We don't want to lift our motor off of the firewall. We want the screw to engage the back of the motor and to thread in nice and even. So when we tighten this down, the motor ends up firmly against the firewall and not lifted off. While we're doing this, you'll see that there's a gap in here between the motor. You can inspect that every couple turns to make sure that the threads don't get anywhere close to the windings. Do this on every motor you install, not just the power pods, but quadcopters, planes, anything that you install. Make sure that those screws are not too long. Now that our motor is installed into our power pod, we're going to go ahead and connect our ESC. You're going to see 3 wires that'll plug right in to our motor. Once again, if you're using any of our power packs, all these bullets are pre-soldered to go with the proper motors, so just plug and play. One thing you want to make sure is don't leave these out just a little bit so they can touch and short out. That's going to burn up your motor and your ESC. Make sure they're nice and closed and there's no exposed brass. Now that we have that, we can take this over to our little servo centering tool, and I'm going to turn it to manual and turn it all the way to 0. I'm going to plug in the lead of our ESC. Now that we have that, I'm going to plug this in. It's now activated. 3 beeps means it's a 3-cell battery. I'm going to turn this very slowly. Now you're going to see that this motor is turning clockwise. We want this to spin counterclockwise because this is a tractor style plane that it's installing into. It's not a wing. So because of that, I'm going to take 2 of these leads and I'm going to swap them. In our beginner series, we cover a lot of the details on how these motors work, the science behind it, and also things like ESC calibrations, etc. Now that we swapped this, I'm going to power it up. And now the motor spins counterclockwise, and that's the direction we want. Always make sure, especially with the minis, that if you have right thrust, you want this to spin counterclockwise. Otherwise, it's going to pull off to the left, and you won't be able to recover from it. Our motor's now spinning properly. We're ready for our build. In this portion of the build, we're going to be making the main body of the Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Now this is the main body of all three Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie jets. They're all going to assemble the exact same. So once you learn this down packed, you're going to be set for the other builds. First thing we want to do is get our pieces in order. We're going to have the top plate, the bottom main plate, the bottom nose piece, the top nose piece, and our power pod holder. Once we have these pieces punched out and all the cavities that we can remove easily, we're going to put our attention towards this main center section and remove the cavities in here. Now you're going to notice on the bottom side that this doesn't go all the way through. That's to keep it looking nice, and we're going to use a barbecue skewer to dig that out. So let's go ahead and take our razor blade and score cut over all the score lines. If you're using the free plans that we have included, make sure that you follow the red lines as score cut. We're going to make sure we don't bring the knife blade down through the paper. That knife dolling trick works really handy, but make sure after you doll the tip, you practice on a scrap piece of foam. All we're doing is helping the laser cut lines get down all the way to the paper and have a nice clean release. We're going to trace every single piece that has a score cut with our knife. This is the last piece that we're score cutting. I'm going to start removing the foam now from each piece and working backwards and showing you exactly what needs to be replaced. For the power pod holder, we're going to fold this 180 degrees, leave it flat on the table, use the tip of our finger, and roll the piece of foam right off. If we do this right, you should have a nice clean release from the paper. If you need to dig it out or clean it up a little bit, go ahead and do that now. The cleaner you make this cavity, the better everything's going to fit together. This is a common technique in all of our builds, so once you master this, you're going to have the skills to do any of our 40 and counting designs. Now the power pod holder's done, we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove the front nose here. Same process as before, just roll it right off into your fingers. If you did your score cut right, you're not going to have any problem removing this. If it's coming off in pieces, just take your knife back down and cut a little bit closer to the paper. Our brown water resistant foam adheres a lot better than the white foam that you may find at the dollar store, which is Adams Ready Board. We're also going to go ahead and remove these pieces here. What we're doing for this is we're prepping each individual piece to get ready for assembly. Before we put this to the side, we're going to do a bevel cut on this piece. We're going to fold this 180 degrees and keeping our razor blade not at a 90-degree angle, but at an acute angle like this. We're going to keep the blade just above the paper right here. We're going to cut about a 45-degree angle. And we're going to do that on both sides. Once again, if you go blunt like this, it's going to wander very easily. Make sure you keep your thumb farther enough back that you're not going to cut into it. This is going to give us the ability to fold this up and get that really beautiful fuselage that the kids designed. This piece is now done. We're on to our next piece. We're going to roll it out, get a nice clean release. Now this build is probably one of the most rewarding builds for an airplane that I've ever seen, but it also has some of the most complicated techniques. One thing we challenged the students to do was to actually come up with 2 new techniques we can share with the community, and they definitely did that with the front part of this fuselage. We're going to fold this 180 degrees. We're going to repeat our bevel cut on the other side. Once again, we're going to make sure it's a nice acute angle, keeping it just above the paper. If you cut through the paper at any time, don't worry, your piece is not ruined. You just can reinforce it with a little piece of tape. Notice I'm cutting the bevel cuts on the inside of this triangle piece, not towards the outer cheeks of the upper nose. There we go. Last step is to peel the paper from both sides. The upper portion of our nose is now done. We can put that aside. This obviously needs no attention. We're good to go. For this last piece, we can also remove these cavities, and we're going to use a barbecue skewer to remove these pieces of foam. Anytime you can take things down to the table and use the table as a way to stabilize and to not bend or crinkle the foam, you can have nicer work. We're going to take the dull edge of our barbecue skewer, we're going to put it right at the very end, and we're going to kind of roll this up. And if we do this right, it's going to pop right off for us. It's not as detrimental that this is perfectly clean, but try to get as much out as you possibly can. I'm just kind of rolling that out. I'm going to go ahead and lay this out just like this so you can pause this and study each piece and make sure your pieces look similar. We're going to go ahead and clear these pieces and put them off to the side. We're going to need them momentarily, so don't get rid of them quite yet. The first main portion that we're going to be doing is going to be the main portion of the lower body. We're going to be doing a B-fold, and what a B-fold is where the side plates are beside the bottom plate. Whenever we talk about A-fold and B-fold, it's always an orientation to the top or the bottom plate relative to the side plate. So think B besides, A above. To practice this, we're going to keep the bottom plate firmly on the table. We're going to rotate this up 90 degrees, and that's the exact angle we want. We want the side plate besides the bottom plate. If you look closer on our indicators that are etched into the foam board kits, you're going to see the exact cross-cut diagram that you're looking for. Once we're happy with the angles and that they fit nice and tight and form a 90-degree angle, we're going to open it up, and we're going to focus the majority of our glue on the side of the bottom plate. I'm going to start about a ½ inch in and stop dispensing glue about a ½ inch from the other end. That way it doesn't squeeze out. Back down on the table, side plate goes up to 90 degrees. And in our kit, you're going to notice a nice little triangle like this. You can either use this and hold it to the side, or in our crafty kits that we sell for STEM and for personal use, we also include a really nice little square. Hold this down for about 45 seconds, hum You Are My Sunshine in your head, and we'll do the other side. Once again, we're focusing the majority of the glue on the side of the bottom plate. Back down firmly against the table, rotate to 90, and we're forcing this side plate down against the table and then holding for 90. I strongly encourage you, whenever a 90-degree angle is involved, always use your square to make sure it's perfectly perpendicular. All right, 45 seconds is done. We're going to do the exact same process now on a smaller piece, and that's going to be our power pod holder right here. Before we glue, we always make sure that we can bend it properly. We got a nice 90 against the table and another nice 90 against the table. What you don't want to do is try to hold it in the air, because you can see all the difference that you can have both in angle and elevation. Always take it to the table and get it to 90. All right, nozzle's going down on the side of the bottom plate, stopping and starting just about a ½ inch, ½ inch from the edge, folding up to 90, and keeping it square. Now with our kits, and if you're scratch building, it's always handy to keep a couple pieces of scrap foam handy right next to you. We can use those scrap pieces of foam to wipe off any excess glue. It'll remove weight and also help things slide easier. Same process on the other side. We're going to open it up. Glue goes on the side of the bottom plate. Back to the table. Fold up to 90. So take my scrap piece, remove any excess glue. Since this is where the power pod slides through, I want to keep this open area nice and clean. You can take your power pod that you've already built and you can test fit it if you wish. Now that we have our power pod piece, you're going to notice that there's tabs that are flush with the edge and tabs that are recessed. We're going to take the tabs that are recessed, and that's going to go on the very back, and we're just going to do a quick test fit. There we go. You're going to notice that the very back of the PowerPod holder is flush with the very back of the body. Once we're happy with the fit, I'm going to put glue on the recessed flats of the PowerPod holder. Just a little drop on these edges too. 180 degrees down, once again making sure the recessed edge and the hole for the PowerPod mount is on the very back. And let it set in place. The lower portion of our main body is now done. We're going to put this aside and we're going to put our attention towards the front nose on both the bottom, top, and we're going to also use the top guide plate as kind of a guide reference for us. So go ahead and put this to the side and bring this piece out here. This is the top piece of the nose. We're going to be using this in just a moment, but this is the piece we want. Now for test fitting, we're going to rotate this up, and there's a lot of tabs on this piece right here. We're going to be using the tabs here, here, and here. Now this requires a little bit of a delicate touch, but what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can hold this in so these tabs line up at the nicest angle possible to be able to sit down in here. Now your foam's going to be coming at an angle, and you don't need a hard joint. You don't need to really worry about bevel cuts, but what we do want is we want to make sure that this is centered up as much as possible. The more you take your time to make sure you're happy with the way this looks, the better it's going to turn out. That looks really nice. Now that we have that motion down, we're going to open this up. We're going to put a thin bead of glue, starting and stopping about a ½ inch from the edge. And we're going to repeat that motion. And we're going to be using our pinch here to decide the angle back here. Get your head looking straight down over top of this, so when you look down on it, you make sure that this is nice and even as far as the angles on both sides. Give this about a minute of holding it still and let it dry thoroughly. Once our minute's up, I'm going to just come back here and I'm going to knock off any excess hot glue that we have up here. And when you notice, when you look straight down, both these angles are the same. One thing you're welcome to do with any of our speed build kits, we do give out free plans, but if you have a speed build kit, you can get extra foam from Adams Ready Board, or we sell our water resistant foam at the store. You can trace all these pieces out and have a permanent pattern, so if you ever have to replace anything or go over, or even share the hobby with a friend and build a plane with them, you can do so. Before we move any further, I'm going to go ahead and put this aside and just do a quick test fit on this piece here. Now the nose is actually going to protrude out the opposite end. This is actually the rear of the fuselage, and this is the front. I'm going to slide this down and make sure that we're happy with our fit. Once again, these angles are not going to come down perfectly, and that's okay because the whole thing gets sandwiched. That looks really good. Now comes the more challenging portion of the whole build. What we're going to do is we're going to roll these edges here that we peeled the paper off of and roll a nice curve to them. We're going to work that curve back because the curve starts right around this area. So what we're trying to do is get the foam to relax in the place that it needs to be bent. So when we bring this bottom up, it's all set. Work on each piece individually and use your forefingers and your thumb to kind of press down and mold it. Take your time doing this. The better glue joint you get and the better fit you get, the nicer your nose is going to look. What we want to do is be able to hold it right at the tip here and have everything nice and tight against itself. Just like that. Now that we're happy with that fit, we're going to take our nozzle. I'm going to drip this down and we're going to just trace this out, keeping the hot glue between the foam and the paper. Be very careful not to burn yourself during this step. We're going to repeat the exact same process as we did before, kind of focusing at the end and pulling this up towards the top. And what I like to do is use the table as my friend and roll this back and forth while keeping the edges tight together. The last thing we want you to do is burn your fingers, so practice this motion before you put the glue down and make sure you're comfortable that your hands are going to be far away from the glue. Don't be afraid to get down low to the table and look across horizontally to make sure that your paper is staying up nice and firm against the bottom. Now if we want to add a little bit of reinforcement after this is thoroughly dried, we can come back in here and put a simple bead of glue. I'm going to scrape off the excess and also drive it down in that cavity. Make sure you give this a good couple minutes of dry time, because if you put that hot glue down and it's not thoroughly dried, it'll soften the glue up once again and it's going to release from itself. Once everything is thoroughly dried, we left this portion deliberately a little bit long. You can take your scissors and you can trim off any excess that you may have and get a nice smooth fit. Now that our bottom portion of our nose is done, we'll put our attention back towards this bottom plate here and do one last test fit. What we're looking for is for this main nose portion to be able to sit down in these grooves and fit firmly against the bottom plate, just as you see here. Once we're happy with the way this looks, we're going to go back and we're going to apply a bead of glue right down into the tabs. Just get as straight of a line as you can going between the tabs. This doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to be sandwiched. It's a lot easier to do it this way than have it dripping off this piece here. Little wiggle on both sides. Sit in a down place, kind of letting that glue grip it. And then our energy is going to be making sure that this piece right here has a nice even gap that's firmly rested up against it. You don't want it kicked over one way or the other. We're going to hold this down, just as you see here, for about 45 seconds to a minute, depending on how much glue you put down. Once this piece is firmly glued down and there's nothing else that's wet, and you're happy with the glue joints, we're going to go ahead and move on to the front nose. Make sure you have some tape handy right by you, because you're going to need this. And also make sure you have plenty of hot glue in your hot glue gun. Alright, if you rip this off for a piece, we ripped off this paper for a reason, and it's because we're going to do the kind of similar process as we did before, and we're going to put a nice gentle curve, and we're going to kind of extend that curve right to about here, kind of rolling it in and folding it. Just give it a very gentle curve, because we're going to be doing a lot of custom forming here, because every nose is going to be a little different. This process is going to require your judgment to make it fit the best. You may find yourself kind of chewing away a little bit of this foam here. Alright, after we're done putting a really gentle curve to it, we're going to do a test fit. Now, I gotta give credit to the Mesa kids. They did an amazing job at getting all these angles as close as possible, but we'll need some custom forming and possibly removing a little material on the edge. Let's go ahead and do a fit here. We're gonna once again keep this corner nice and even on both sides, this angle here. And we're gonna set this down. And if you built this pretty close, you're gonna find that most of it fits very nice and neat right over the top. Okay, what I wanna do now, I want to make sure that my angle here is not restricted, and I'm going to remove just a little bit more foam on this piece right here. Kind of wanting to favor one side. You may have to do this as well. There we go. That's nice and even. So now that we have the angle pretty well done, we don't want to fatigue this joint too much. We're going to take 3 strips of tape. They're going to be our helping hand so we don't burn ourselves. One strip here. One strip here, and one strip on our nose. Now, if you're using the white foam board from Adams, you don't want to tape this way. You're going to have to find other ways, like using scrap pieces of foam to hold this down. The tape doesn't like to release too easy. Now, you can do this step, but just don't try to remove your tape at the end of the step. Leave it on and just trim it back. Now, I only went about 3 inches in from the tip to where the tape ends, and that's exactly where we're going to put our glue. So I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to put a bead of glue right down both centers here. Make sure you have plenty of glue in your hot glue stick. And then I'm going to trace this edge right along the nose. Now I'm going to flip this over, keeping my fingers away from the hot glue. I'm going to tape this front nose down. And I'm going to bend this piece down, repeating that same motion that we did when we were test fitting it. Except this time, I'm going to roll the tape around and glue it in place. Just how you see here. If you need to push on the tape a little harder, say like in the nose portion, you now have a free hand that you can custom fit and make sure as the glue is drying, it's doing it well. Don't be alarmed if this doesn't look quite right just yet. We'll take care of that shortly. Go back and forth to both sides, and also make sure that this center section is centered up as much as possible with the lower part of the fuselage. Once you're happy with the way it looks, Let it dry for about a minute. Now this is thoroughly dried, we're going to put our attention to getting the rest of this contour. We really needed to set the nose and get this angle from about 3 inches from the tip set down nice and firm, because this is actually going to squeeze the body up and mold very nicely. We're going to go ahead and take this piece here and we're going to mold this back, and we're going to look at the points like where it's kind of lifting up. If it's right here and see where the foam collides with the paper, we can simply fix that by taking our razor blade and just removing a little bit of a gap. If any of you have ever built RC duck, you know how much, a little bit of custom forming is important. Take your time on this, and the goal is going to be to get this to wrap around all the way to the front. We're going to be able to use tape as our helping hands here, so don't worry about trying to hold it in place too much. Just make sure that when it is formed, that the tape can hold it down to a nice tight glue joint. That's going to make the nose incredibly strong. You may have to go over a couple times, remove foam in different areas, and that's okay. I'm just going to take off a little bit on this top edge, letting it seat down just a little bit tighter. I built a lot of these noses here practicing for this build video, and I find that every one just a little bit different, so we can't just say bevel both edges and glue it together. It may not work for you depending on how this angle is. So just take your time. Give yourself a good 5 minutes of adjusting and tweaking. Once you're happy with that, position your tape and get ready for the hot glue. We're going to trim and adjust both sides so we glue them at once to keep that nose nice and even on both sides. So you just kind of got to look in there and kind of carefully remove and fit to get that angle as nice as possible. This is one of the new techniques that the students came up with to help us get more advanced with our foam building. That looks really nice. Alright, I'm going to put a piece of tape on this. This is by far the most difficult step in the whole entire build. So once you're past this and you're happy with the results, you're on the home stretch. Alright, so you can see as I open this up, I have two nice areas to put my glue down on. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to keep as much glue off the tape as possible because I don't want to glue the tape to the foam board. Do one side at a time. There we go. I'm going to even bring that in just a little bit down in here, just kind of pushing it up in there. I'm going to do my next side. Now very carefully, making sure I don't burn myself, I'm going to press this down. Press my tape into place. Take a little extra piece of tape here. It'll help me with this angle right here. Same process on the other side. I apologize, I got to work a little bit quickly to make sure that everything gets put down nice and even. And we'll take just a little piece of tape here. Now, because we're insulating this with tape, the last thing we want to do is to jump the gun and remove this too quickly. So I'm going to let this sit, and as long as I'm happy with these angles, give this about 5 minutes to dry thoroughly. You can also go back when you're done, and you can put a little bead of glue right down in that crack, and take a scrap piece of foam and press it in, just to give yourself a little bit of extra strength. Alright, our 5 minutes has passed. We're going to go ahead and carefully remove our tape. And if any portion starts lifting up, that's okay. We can come back with some hot glue, put it underneath the flap, and push it back down. If any of the tape won't release, don't worry about that. Just leave it on, rather than destroying or hurting the front of your nose. I'm really grateful for the students of our FT STEM class that they put so much heart and energy into making this a beautiful fit. It's definitely a challenging technique, but once you master this, you're going to be able to apply this to future designs and really push the limits of what foam can do. Can't thank Adams enough for helping us design this water-resistant foam. The fact that we can tape to it and release from it, and also paint to it, really makes it exceptional. Alright, our nose looks great. We're going to go ahead and do a test fit for our top plate. Now, one thing we need to do is we need to cut 2 little bevel notches. So before we damage our foam, I'm just going to come in here and just cut 2 little 45 degrees. Unfortunately, our laser won't do this for you, so you have to. Doesn't have to be perfect, just a 45 on each side, and knock it out. Now we can pinch each one of these little notches just to help us with alignment, because it doesn't really have to give us strength. It just has to hold itself and keep everything nice and perpendicular. I'm doing the same thing here with the top portion of the fuselage where our nose is attached. I'm rolling up the outer edge to help it fit in the notch, because the bottom's going to want to protrude underneath it. Here we go. Now I can take this piece and line it up and press it down. A lot of tabs, but this is for alignment. This whole thing should jig together and give you a really great building experience. While we're fitting this, I'm going to take this to the edge of the table. Actually, I'll take it to the edge of my build mat, because there's a little lip right here. And I want to make sure that I can push down nice and firm, because after we glue this, we're going to flip it on its back and we're going to press down in this area right here. Last thing I want to do is make sure this is fitting nice, and that when you sight across it, that the plate doesn't wedge up. If it does, just remove the plate and remove a little bit of foam from both sides. You're going to notice that I have an extra hot glue gun stick laying to the side, and I have a nice Adtech Pro 200 fully heated, ready to go. We're going to put on a huge amount of glue at once, so make sure you have plenty of glue by you. And if you have two smaller glue guns, plug them both in, and that way you can dispense enough. Alright, we're going to start with the outer edges first. We're going to put them in the lows. You're going to find after a couple models you're going to become a real pro at dispensing glue. Put a little bit on the top here. And then we're just going to try to get the best on top of the flats. If it's a little sloppy, that's okay. Just on the highest portion here, because we're going to press it into place. Once we turn this over on its back, gravity is going to help us and make this glue flow back towards us. Alright, we're going to get our notches all lined up. Make sure that you don't burn yourself with the hot glue. And we're going to repeat that exact same motion as we did before. Getting this edge right on the edge there and pressing firmly down into the table. If you don't have a building mat, no big deal. Just take it to the edge of the table, as you see right here. After about 45 seconds to a minute, we're going to come up. We're just going to make sure that these are nice, firmly placed down. Nice and flat. While this is drying, just for a little added strength in some of these areas that have the bevel, you can just put a stripe of glue down. It's going to kind of marry the two pieces together. You can do that on all these, but you really don't have to. It's mainly these beveled edges right here. At this point, the main portion of your fuselage is done. We're ready to move on to the next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to be showing you how to assemble and attach the front detail of our Bravo. For the front portion of our wing detail, we're only going to need two pieces here. Just like other processes in our builds, we're going to clear out the cavities to make our A-folds. As we score cut these with a razor blade, we're going to make sure we don't go through the bottom layer. Once we have this, we can flip it over 180 degrees. Just use the edge of our fingers to try to get out in one clean piece. If you don't get out in one clean piece, don't worry. You can easily go back and carve out the rest. There's one. We're going to repeat the exact same process now on the other canard. Alright, fold 180 degrees. There we go. Now that we have the cavities made, we're going to perform two A-folds. We're going to concentrate on one side at a time, and we're always going to bend before we glue. So the A-fold is where the side cheeks are above the bottom plate. Here's our side cheek, here's the bottom plate. To do this A-fold, we're going to keep the side plate against the table while we roll the bottom plate up at a 90-degree angle. Once we're happy with that angle, we're going to apply some glue on the bottom of the side plate, lay it down against the table, and then fold up to 90. Hold it there a good 45 seconds. Now if the one side's done, we're going to repeat the same fold. The only difference now is we're going to make sure that not this portion is 90 degrees from the table, but this bottom portion here. So once we're happy with the fold and we're happy with the way everything fits, we're going to be focusing our glue. Just a little drop on the side, and a small bead on the bottom of the side plate. Up to 90 degrees. And once again, we're going to make sure we keep this portion here 90 degrees to the table. We're going to take a scrap piece of barbecue skewer or a ballpoint pen, and we're going to lightly drag this over, breaking the tension of the top piece of the paper and leaving a slight cavity. The reason for this is when this is mounted, we're going to want this angle to come down and meet the side of the fuselage. Now that we have this done, we're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Just for a review, always test fit, A-fold, looks good. Putting glue down on the top of the side plate. The side plate goes against the table, up to 90 degrees, and hold for 45 seconds. Test fit on our next piece. Once again, it's an A-fold. Bringing this edge here 90 degrees to the table. You don't need to be excessive with this glue. These are really just to kind of hold dimensions, not so much structural. The best thing you can do is just concentrate on getting the angles that you need right. And now that we have these joints, we're going to follow up again, breaking the top tension of that paper, putting a little bit of a groove in there so this edge can meet down to the side of the fuselage. This canard here we're going to be addressing in just a moment. We're going to bring in our fuselage here, and we're going to just do a quick test fit. We're going to take the small notch that we have here and line it up against the notch here. And then this portion here may need to be trimmed to meet and flush up against your fuselage. And it looks like I just have to mute just a little bit of meat right in this area right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of cut a little groove out here. Doesn't have to be perfect, we just kind of give a little bit of room. There we go. And to follow up, what we're looking for here is going to be for our canards, this edge right here, to be able to come down at a 90-degree angle. So when I lift this up like this, and then come down here, it meets up nice and flush with the fuselage. Once we're happy with the fit, we're going to go ahead and first attach this piece here to the fuselage. Healthy bead of glue on the lows, a little drop here and here. As we press this down into the notches, our focus is going to be mainly on making sure that this top surface here is parallel with the bottom surface of the body or the fuselage. Go ahead and give this a good minute to dry. Now that the front wing detail is fastened to the fuselage, I'm going to fold this over 180 degrees very carefully, and not putting glue where the canards are, but putting a bead of glue down in the seam right here, stopping and starting from the edge, and then also a nice healthy bead of glue on the top of the fuselage. I'm going to fold this over. I'm going to put my energy now into making sure that this edge here lines up nice and neat, starting and stopping and being flush. We're going to hold this in shape for a good 45 seconds to a minute until it's thoroughly dry and we can remove our hands and it doesn't move. Now that this piece here is firmly glued, we're going to put our attention towards the canard. We want the canard to be at a 90-degree angle to this surface right here. So to get that, we're going to take our square or the foam piece that's included in our kit, and when we put glue down, we're going to hold it at an angle like this. Open up 180 degrees. Nice healthy bead of glue. A lot of this is going to squirt out, so have a scrap piece of foam handy, ready to scrape it off. We're going to hold this at a 90 degrees until it's thoroughly dry. Once it starts setting up, we can just take a quick moment and scrape off any excess we may have. but then immediately go back to our 90. All right, we have one canard done. It's nice and strong. Let's go ahead and do the other side. Just as a quick recap, we're going to line up the back tab, make any necessary adjustments here. We're going to just take a little bit of meat off right this area. Don't worry too much, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. There we go. Once we're happy with the fit, apply glue to the low portions of the joint. And glue it in place. Make sure the top surface here is parallel to the bottom surface of the body. Once our glue joint's firmly attached to the body, we're going to make sure that we got this nice and aligned with the side portion of the fuselage here. Once that's good, we're going to open this up all the way again. Nice healthy bead both on the crease and on the side of the jet. Settle it down into place and hold till dry. Last step is to apply a bead of glue to our canard. Bend it to 90 degrees. Just wipe off any excess we have real quick. And hold it at 90 degrees until it's thoroughly dried. The front detail of our wing and our canards are now done on the Bravo. We're ready to move on to our next step. So before we get started, make sure that you have your servo centered. If you never centered your servos before, it's very simple. Now it's really important before we install the servos that we center them and we also install the proper servo horns. This is going to change from model to model. So in this one here, these are the 9051s. This process is the same even if you're using the ES0882s, which are 9-gram servos. These are 4.5 grams. These servos are incredibly high quality, even though they're very economical. I'm going to put this on to show you how well centered they are from the factory. I'm going to plug this into our servo centering tool. If you don't have one of these tools, it is so convenient and so useful in so many ways. I strongly recommend you getting it. This is only about $7 from our store. We'll have a link down below for you to use. On the side of a servo centering tool, you're going to notice 3 indicators. You got your servo, which is your signal wire, your positive, and your negative. We're going to line up the ground wire with the negative, the power's in the middle, and the signal wire, which is usually white or yellow, will be on the top. For powering this, a simple quick tip that you can do if you don't have a single cell battery is using the balance lead of a 2 or 3 cell battery. Now you're going to notice on the battery you always have a power indicated wire. So here's your positive red, all the rest are considered negatives, and we're going to only take the red one up to line up with the power and the ground on the servo centering tool. You don't want to put a 2 cell on this because it's going to destroy your tool and your servos and void your warranty. So now I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to plug my power line into the middle, my ground going down towards the bottom, and now I have 1 cell worth of power. Now you're going to notice that these multiple ports are here. It doesn't matter which plug you plug in to power your unit, and you can center 3 servos at one time. This tool also works to test motors and ESCs. Now that we have this, you can see that I can move my servo back and forth with no problem. When I was talking about how well centered this is up, I'm going to turn this to the extreme, and I'm going to clip center, and you're going to see it's spot on from the factory. You never want to take this for granted because if you do and you install this and you power it on, you're going to use all your sub trims and all your trim to override it. What centered servo technically is basically just telling the servo to be in the center position so it has equal throws both ways. Now with this servo guide, if I flip the center and you see something like this, all you need to do is install your servo horn at 90 degrees. Now we're going to do the exact same on the opposite one. The only difference is we want this servo horn to go the other direction. For this build, we're going to be using our longer servo arms and our ES9051 servos. Now, the kit is also made so you can put in ES0882s if you're going to put a very big motor or fly fast. So accept either the 4.5 gram, which are these, or the 8 or 9 gram, which are the ES0882s that are available in our store. We're going to be using the longer arms instead of our mini arms, which look like this. I have one installed and cut down. I'm going to cut down the other one. I want this to face this way, so I'm going to remove this portion here. You can do this with cutters, scissors, whatever you want. Cuts very easy. The bigger ones you're going to need to use a saw or razor blade. My servos are already centered, so I'm going to just lay this on and screw it down. Alright, we can recenter these before we install them to our push rod assembly. but this is what you're going to want it to look like. We're going to put these aside and get started on our tail. In this portion of the build, we're going to be installing our tail, cutting our hinge lines, installing our servos, push rods, and control horns. For installing our tail surfaces and our rudder, we're going to need the following parts. We're going to need our horizontal stabilizer pieces, our vertical fins, our servos that have been pre-centered, our control horns, and push rods. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards the stabilizer first and cut our hinge lines in it. To do this, we're going to open this up 180 degrees, and on the side with the control horn slot, we're going to cut a 45-degree bevel. Now we're going to keep our blade at a 45-degree angle, not 90 degrees, so it doesn't wander too easy. And we're going to let the blade do the work in the tracking, keeping the blade as close as possible to the paper in the middle, and also watching ahead of the blade to make sure we don't cut into our thumb or get off track. Make sure when you have this, you have nice free flow both directions. If you have to go by a couple times or even sand it to get a nice clean edge, that's okay. We're going to do the other side before we go back into our reinforcement hinge. Once again, 180 degrees, 45-degree bevel cut. Now that we have full range of motion, I'm going to keep a scrap piece of foam handy. I'm going to come back to my hinge line, and I'm going to take the tip of my hot glue nozzle and I'm going to put it right on the paper and put a very thin ribbon of glue right down the paper. You can practice this on the scrap piece if you need. Once I have this ribbon of glue down, I'm going to scrape off about 90% of it, pushing as much as possible into the foam and paper, making a nice glue reinforced hinge. After about 45 seconds, I can give it a motion of control, make sure that it's not binding. If it was free before and after the glue it binds, most likely you probably have a glue buildup in the center hinge line. You can come back with a razor blade and shave that off. Make sure you have no problem with your elevator movement. Do the same process on the other side here. Nice thin ribbon. Press it down into the paper, scraping off as much as possible. Should look a nice shiny sheen on the foam if you do it right. And after about 45 seconds, we check our motion and make sure we have no binding. While we're doing the bevel cuts, we're also going to do one on our vertical fins, which actually aren't vertical. They're in an angle. The top is joined. So we're going to open this up 180 degrees. And we're just going to put a medium 40-degree, 45-degree bevel cut on each side. One there. And one here. Now that we have that, you're going to see that we have the ability now to establish our angle, just as you see here. This little gauge is included inside just to make sure that you beveled it enough to be able to get the proper angle that you need. Let's go and take this to our fuselage and give it a test fit. For test fitting this, we want this to fit in the slots as you see here. And we want this top ridge to be nice and centered with the rest of the fuselage. Once you're happy with that angle, let's first go ahead and establish this by gluing at the top, and then going back to our fuselage for a test fit, and hold it there for a good 45 seconds. We can come back here and put glue on our lows. Keep in mind when we flip this over, gravity's going to start working for us, so we're going to want to find those slots pretty quick. One down, and then the other down. Now because this is coming at an angle, it's not going to be the most strong. So let's go ahead and follow up, once this is dried, with a bead of glue just down in these cavities here to lock it in. We can follow up with a scrap piece of foam and wipe off any excess. We're going to have to be fitting the Elevon in here, so we don't want it to be too sloppy. Same process over here. And let it dry for a good 45 seconds to a minute. Now that our fin is dried, we're going to go ahead and test fit this. With the hinge line facing down, you're going to see that when we go to test fit this, this area here is hitting the fin. To take care of that problem, I'm just going to take my blade, and I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle and remove that excess piece. Doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to be hidden. Now you can see we can slide it in nice and neat. And if we flip this over, you're going to see that the hinge line is about 1/4 of an inch ahead of the back plate, as you see here. We're going to want to make sure that we can fit this whole stabilizer firmly against the fuselage to keep it nice and true to the fuselage. Once we're happy with that fit, we'll remove it. And keeping in mind where the fuselage touches and where it doesn't, I'm going to trace the edge here, around here, and around here, but I'm not going to go towards the hinge line. Slide it down. And press firmly against the bottom of the fuselage. After about 20-30 seconds of holding, just flip it upside down and give it a quick inspection. There's still time for some small adjustments if you need to make sure that the horizontal is firmly against the bottom of the body. Let's go ahead and repeat the exact same process on the other side. First, a quick little bevel cut. Doesn't have to be perfect, just now a test fit. Make sure we're happy with everything. And once we're happy, follow up with glue. Back down against the top of the body and hold firmly for about 30 seconds before flipping it over to inspect it. Once we're happy with that and everything looks good, we can do one last step to make it really strong. And that's to put a nice healthy bead right down in the seam here. Take a scrap piece of foam, drive down as much glue as you possibly can into the crease, scrape off the excess. Do this on both sides. Now that our tail assembly is on our body, we can flip this over. Be careful not to push down too hard and crease any of your foam. This is going to be a great time to go ahead and test fit our servos. And to do so, we're going to pass this through, but I'm going to keep my servo arm facing out and also the servo arm as far towards the nose as possible. You're going to see when I pass this down through that the hole for the barbecue skewer that holds the power pod and the rubber bands in is still open. You want to make sure that it looks just like this before moving forward. Next, we're going to install our control horn. And finally, we're going to take our push rod that's included in our kit, and we're going to go from the inward side out, making sure that the push rod is as close to the fuselage as possible. We're going to hold this as level as possible, while kind of bending it inward to touch the fuselage. Now that we have our push rod installed, we're going to go ahead and line up the push rod with the second hole on the servo arm while bending it in slightly and holding this neutral. Take a moment to see here how I'm doing this. With the tip of my thumb lining up with the hole, this is going to be my mark. I want to grab this right at where my thumb is. I'm going to bend it straight down. Once I have this, I'm going to go 2 millimeters in from where my bend is. And I'm going to go straight towards me. This is called a modified Z-bend. I can now cut this about 1/4 inch from the edge. Now that we have all our pieces made, we can assemble our push rod assembly right here on the desk very easily. We're going to rotate this in. Don't worry, we'll recenter our servos before we glue everything down. I'm just going to center that up like that. Pass this back through. And we'll attach our control horn, once again making sure that our hole is as close to being over top of the control horn as possible. Now you're going to see that when I just naturally put it on like this, it deflects up. But when we put the zip tie on, it's going to come exactly to where we want it. We're going to put a drop of glue down into the slot and make sure this joint is really strong. If this lets go, you're going to lose control of your airplane. Hold this in place for a good minute. Now that our control horn is firmly glued in, we're going to take a zip tie and wrap it around the push rod. Tighten the zip tie down as tight as you can without binding so it can flow freely back and forth. Take a pair of scissors, cut about 1/2 inch at a 45-degree angle to make a sharp point. And with the zip tie between the control horn and the servo, push it through the foam as you see right here. Once we're happy with that, put a drop of glue down, press it through one last time, and hold it in place. After about a minute, you can come back and cut off the excess on the back side. Our final step is to move this back and forth, and what we want to see here is just a slight deflection up. It's too small of a deflection to really be able to give you guys a gauge for, so what you're going to want to do is just take neutral and then take this about the thickness of one thickness of foam upwards. We can trim it out in flight. Once we have that, we'll put a drop of glue under each flap of the servo and press it down in. We can also follow up. Put a drop of glue on the cavities. Just make sure you wipe off any excess so it doesn't bind up against the wing. Once the servo is thoroughly dried, we're now done with one side. We're going to do the exact same process on the other. Test fit the servo, making sure the servo arm is pointing out towards us and as far towards the nose as possible, keeping that little hole there clear. Test fit our control horn, making sure that the hole is as close to being over top of the hinge line as possible. Then we'll snake the push rod through, keeping it as close on the inward side between the control horn and the fuselage. Keeping this nice and level, hold it against here, and mark the point of the middle hole with your finger. Once we have that reference mark, we're going to grab it, bend it straight down towards the building table, and about 2 millimeters in from the bend, bend it straight towards us. We're going to trim off about 1/4 of an inch, and now we have a modified Z-bend. Just to make it easy, we're going to build this out on the table and we'll insert it. I'm going to go for the center hole here. This is the advanced airframe, so this is going to give us lots of control authority, very fast roll rate. So if you need to go inwards because you're more of a beginner, that's fine. Pass this on through. And one final install to make sure we're happy with all the fit. Looks great. Now we can apply some glue down in our control horn gap that we just made. Don't be afraid to deflect that away, because once we pull that push rod in, it's going to be just fine. Make sure you let this thoroughly dry, because it's very important that this doesn't move from your elevon. Take our zip tie and tighten it down as much as possible to keep the wire from bending, but not binding. Cut at a 45. And with the zip tie halfway between the control horn and the servo arm, and the wire relaxed, puncture through, just like you see here. Well, once we're happy with that, put a bead of glue down inside that hole, and repeat the same step as again. After 45 seconds, you can go on the back and cut off the excess. Now we put our attention towards our servo. We have a small amount of adjustment we can do here. We're going to make sure that the elevon is just slightly bent up. A very slight amount for the reflex that we need. Once we're happy with that, we can put a drop of glue underneath each wing. Do one last adjustment, making sure we have it where we want it. If you need to plug your servo centering tool back in to make sure your servo center is good, go ahead and do that now. Make sure that everything is nice before you fasten it down one last time. While this is drying, I'm just going to take 2 pieces of tape. I'm going to take the leads of my servos. I'm going to cover them up just so it doesn't get snagged by the wing. Our tail assembly and our servos are now done. We're ready to move on to the wing. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to assemble the wing and install it on our fuselage. For our wings, we only need 3 main pieces, the 2 wing halves and our center spar. We're first going to put attention towards our wings, and you're going to notice that we have 1 hole that's cut through for our servo passage and 1 hole that's scored. We're going to lightly follow along these score lines, not going through the paper below, And then we're going to take a piece of barbecue skewer and we're just going to roll this right out. This is similar to what we did on the body of the fuselage. Just take your time. It should pop out nice and clean. You can use the edge like an eraser. Just don't fatigue the paper and dent it. Do this on both sides. There we go. Next, we're going to flip this over 180 degrees, and we're going to join the two edges. Easy way to do this with our packing tape is to take our tape on one half, firmly apply it, lifting up the other edge. We can get a fine adjustment now and line it up just perfectly before laying down the other edge. We then come back with something like a piece of foam, razor blade, and just work the tape down nice and flat. When we flip it over, we should see that our reference lines are nice and level and everything lines up beautifully. We're going to open this up nice and wide and put a healthy bead of glue right down in it. Keep a scrap piece of foam handy because when we flatten this out, any hot glue that squeezes out, we can wipe off. While we're holding this flat against the table, if we have any extra tape on it, we can fold that over now. And let it dry. Next, we're going to apply a bead of glue inside the etch areas. We're going to line up our main spar right over top of the etch. Slide around a little bit, spread that glue out, and then center it up on the etch lines as best you can. Press firmly on this for about 45 seconds. Now that our spar is thoroughly dried, we're going to do a light score cut right down our leading edge hinge line. Right here. And right here. We're going to leave these two lines alone here because this is what's going to tell our wing where to bend for our airfoil. We're going to take this and carefully crack this open and open up 180 degrees. Once we have it open 180 degrees, we're going to do a double bevel. Our first bevel, once again keeping our blade at a nice 45-degree angle just above the paper. Always looking ahead of the blade slightly to make sure your fingers and any debris is away from it. We're going to do the same process on the other side. I don't need to go to the edge, just need to go to where our bevel is. And we're going to do the exact same process now on the other side. Going to end it right about here. 180 degrees once again. There we are. So I'm going to lay this flat, study this picture here, make sure that your wing looks exactly like what you see here. Next, we're going to take the tip of a ballpoint pen or a tip of our barbecue skewer, and we're going to just very lightly penetrate right through the very top surface of the paper. Don't go down to the bottom sheet or go too deep because we don't want this area to be too loose. We want to make this wet when we fold it over, it tells the foam exactly where we want it to bend, but we don't want to make any weak points in this area either. Now the important thing is when we bend this over for our test fit, we want to see the top surface of the wing be lined up with the bottom surface of the wing below. So in other words, when these two are touching each other, you should have a nice perpendicular line from the table. And if you're happy with that, make sure you have plenty of glue in your glue gun. We're going to put a bead of glue right down the leading edge double bevel. We're going to press a thin bead of glue into each of our bevel lines. And then going about 2 inches from each half, a bead on the spar, and then finally one bead on the trailing edge. That's why it's really important we have plenty of glue. We'll fold this over, repeat the exact same process as we did before, except this time we'll be putting most of our pressure on the trailing edge here and on the main spar while looking over to make sure that our leading edge is lined up with the bottom surface of our wing. Hold this for a good minute before releasing it, and make sure you don't push too hard that you crease your foam. We're going to repeat the exact same process now on the other side. Fold it over. Make sure we're establishing those creases nice and neat. And when we come over, we're going to put most of our attention into making sure that this leading edge here is directly over. You do need to make any adjustments like I got to do on this one. Most of the time it's just cutting a little bit more of a bevel so it's allowed to fold over easier. There we go. Fit looks good. Beaded glue just really thin down in each crease. Make sure you work quickly. Right down the leading edge. Stop about 2 inches from the center and 1 stripe down the trail edge. Folding it over. Concentrating most of our pressure on the main spar and the trail edge, but not putting so much pressure down that we dent the foam. The last step before our wing is completed is we're going to put 2 little spacers here just to keep this area nice and strong. We're going to float this in the middle and just squeeze it down like you see here. Once you're happy with that, put a little bead of glue on both sides. Slide it in. Then press it down. This is just going to keep the thickness of this wing at a constant chord, so when it meets up with your fuselage, it's nice and firm. We're going to do this on both sides. The last step with our wing is let's go ahead and put on our fuselage and see how it looks. Fantastic. You're now ready for the next step, which is installing our electronics. In this step, we're going to install our power pod, dress our electronics, make sure all our controls are moving the right way, and put the barbecue skewers in that ultimately are going to hold down our wing. For installing our power pod and hooking up our electronics, we're going to need a couple basic items. We're obviously going to need our fuselage that we just put our servo and controls in. We're going to need our power pod that we built earlier connected to our ESC with the motor running the proper direction. And we're also going to need a receiver that's been bound to our transmitter. Now we're going to be using the MZ12 transmitter coupled with the GR12L receiver. Now if you just bought this and it's brand new, you don't need to worry about going through the bind sequence. Let's go ahead and start off by installing our ESC. That's going to go into slot 1. Grobner and Spektrum share the same channel mapping, so you'll have throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, and usually gear or flap, and then accessory. I'm going to pass this whole process through the back end. And then I'm going to install my power pod. Now I can install my 2 servos for my elevons. We're going to make sure that the ground is on the top because that's what it indicates on the receiver. Every receiver can be different, even if it's in the same manufacturing blind, so always look at how it's mapped on your receiver and plug it in accordingly. Once we have this with no props on, we can power it up. Always make sure you power on your transmitter first. Okay, I'm going to turn this away from you. Every manufacturer is different, but I have this already pre-programmed for elevons, so when I pull up, the elevons go up. When I push forward, they go down. When I go to the right, they go right. And when I push left, they go left. Now I can use sub-trims to be able to get this exactly where I want it. So say we centered up, got as close as we want, but it's still a little bit off. I can press enter once. Go to my sub-trim and adjust anything to where I need it. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting both elevons just about level with just a touch of up. Now, if you've never dialed in delta mixing before, on this MZ12 I can show you. If you're using Spektrum, we have a video link below that'll show you how to use delta mixing on a couple common brands. I'm going to scroll over to model type, press enter once, go to model type, and then here you're going to see where it gives you all your options. If I click and highlight this, typically it's in normal. I'm going to click it up 2 times to take it into delta or F1W. That's going to give ourselves delta mixing. Now that our controls are all hooked up and they're moving the way we want to, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards cleaning up the electronics. We can go ahead and unplug this and turn off our transmitter. And because there's not a lot of airflow through this, I'm going to just put a drop of glue on the back of the ESC and fasten it to the side of the fuselage. Giving it the most space possible, we'll be able to draw extra air and cool down. Now I'm going to take the receiver, and I'm going to take the extra cable here, and I'm going to just push it back towards our power pod in the back. Just kind of tuck it back in here a little bit. To take care of the antenna, I'm going to put a little poke in the side, and I'm pass my antenna cable through here. This is going to hold it at a 90-degree angle and keep it out of the way. The last step is to apply some Velcro down. Now I use the term fuzzy fuselage to remind me to put the fuzzy side on the fuselage and the prickly side on the battery, but you go ahead and do what's right for you. I'm going to lay the whole strip down on here so we have maximum movement, but most likely your battery's going to be placed right about here. Now that everything's cleaned up, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards the wing hold downs. So if you have our kit, these holes are going to already be drilled for you. All you need to do is lightly guide them through with a twisting motion going through each hole. When you get to the power pod that doesn't have a hole made, just give it a twisting motion like a drill bit to go through it. Once we have one side done, we're going to do the exact same to the other side. Once we're happy with that, we can push it about a 1/4 inch from each side and cut off the excess. Just roll this back and forth a couple times and crack it. This time before we pass it through, we're only going to go through the first section, and then we're going to hook a rubber band on each side. This is going to keep our rubber bands from falling off and enable us to change the wings even quicker. The front of the wing hold downs is a little bit different. All we need to do is take an extra piece of our barbecue skewer and using the barbecue skewer like a drill bit, go down about 1.5 inches. Once you go down about 1.5 inches, mark about 3/4 inch on the outside and then cut it to size. Let's use this piece that we just cut to do on the other side. The twisting motion keeps the paper from bundling up and drills it right down through the foam nice and easy. Before we glue this in, let's go and grab our other barbecue skewer and cut a piece the same size. Now we can take our hot glue, put a nice bead of glue on there, and once again with the twisting motion, set it down in place, leaving about 3/4 inch sticking out. Same process on the other side. All right, with our rubber bands and our barbecue skewers all installed, let's go ahead and put the wing on one final time. We're now ready for the next step, which is building our canopy and then taking it out for our maiden. In this portion of the build, we're going to build our canopy, install our decal that's included with the kit, and also put our prop on and establish our proper CG. For our canopy build, we only need one piece, but there's a lot that's going to go on with that one piece. Now I'm going to use the Alpha frame for this, but it's the exact same process with the Bravo and the Charlie. We're going to lightly score these lines, making sure we don't go through the paper on the bottom. Once we have that, we can open this up, And we're gonna go one side at a time. We're gonna cut a nice deep bevel, about 45 degrees. You may need to go back as you build this and increase these angles depending on the fit that you need, but 45 degrees is a really good start. You're going to see whenever I have to push the blade, I kind of use a saw motion. That simulates me pulling it through. Now we're going to be doing additional bevel cuts, but before we move on, I'm going to fold these guys up. I'm going to bring in my fuselage, and I'm going to just start doing some test fitting because this is really going to be custom fit to your fuselage. I'm going to lightly push this in, and what I want this is to be under tension. I want this to want to spring out, but I want to feel even tension on both sides. Pressing this in, I'm going to line up the trail edge here with the very back of the wing. I'm going to push it in and rotate it down. This is going to be the angle we need for the top of our fuselage. So our next step as we move forward is we're going to remove this, apply glue to these two seams on the inside, and then reinstall it. Make sure you don't put your glue so it drops down and glues it inside the wing. I'm going to focus the majority of my glue right where the paper and the foam meet, stopping and starting about a ½ inch from the edge. Again, folding it in, pressing it down, and lining up the trail edge of the wing. You have a little bit of adjustment room here, so make sure these two angles are nice and even. And that looks really nice. Give this about 45 seconds to dry nice and thoroughly before you remove it. Alright, our 45 seconds to a minute's now up. As we remove this, you're going to notice it has like a nice springy tension to it. That's exactly what we want. We can go back now to this wing. And what I like to do is cut a slight bevel in, just to encourage this canopy to seat down even further and bite even firmer into the wing. Doesn't have to be super sharp, and you definitely don't want to go through the full wing. Just give it a nice sharp bevel, so when this pops in, it grips. Now we're going to put our attention onto the front portions here. We're going to be working from the back towards the front, custom fitting as we go. This canopy is going to travel with this fuselage no matter how many different wings that you change. So it's going to be matched up perfectly. Alright, our next step now is to start forming the front, and you're going to notice that our fuselage is restricting this from cupping in too much. So what we're going to want to do, I'm going to just open this up and flip this backwards. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to match the angle of this fuselage and shave off as much area as we need for this to actually cup in and pinch in and meet nice and flush. So right now I'm seeing my angle is probably about a 60-degree angle, and we're going to cut that right now. As we cut a deeper angle, make sure your thumb's further back. Very easy to hit this. If you need to take this down to the table, that's fine too. Just make sure that you keep your thumbs clear from the blade. While we have this open, we can flip this 180 degrees, and we're going to put a very mild edge just to keep the paper from stressing out and possibly delaminating right here. So now as this squeezes in, it's actually going to go inside two sides of the canopy, as you see here. Let's go ahead and test fit this and see how it looks. You may have to go back and forth 3 or 4 times easily to get the fit that you want, but take your time because when it's done it looks amazing. I think we got it right off the bat. Let's open this up to show you. Our angle is nice and tight against the fuselage, and that's exactly how we want it to be. So now we're going to lift this up, open up, same process as before, focusing most of the glue right against the paper and inside both edges, stopping before each edge so it doesn't squeeze out and get messy. Flip it around, we'll reinstall our canopy, pinch this together, and hold it firmly down against the fuselage. Now you're not going to be able to let go of this for about 45 seconds, so take your time, sing a song in your head, and let the glue do its job. Alright, our 45 seconds to a minute's done. You can see it doesn't move, that's exactly what we want. Give it a little wiggle, make sure you haven't accidentally glued it to your fuselage. And now we're going to do the exact same process on the front end. This is going to need to go down quite a bit more, so we automatically know that I'm going to need a deeper bevel right here. I'm going to leave this on and just do it right on the plane. Always look ahead of your blade on what you're cutting into. It'll help you guide your blade, but it'll also keep your fingers free as well. Alright, we're going to fold this in and take it down. Now I can see automatically that I need to cut this and cut the meat down quite a bit here and here. We're going to be matching the angles here, so it's going to be a very deep cut, just like we put on here. So we're going to do that right now. I'm going to just take this to the table just to be a little bit safer. Alright. Keep my fingers free. We'll first get our bevel cut in the front. See, I kind of rock that back and forth like a saw. Rotate that 90 degrees, keep my fingers nice and far away. Just to give you a better angle of what we're doing, I'll hold this up. You can also go back with sandpaper if you need to and sand this as well. Alright, final piece, keeping our thumb nice and far away. There's no need to go fast through these steps. Take your time. Always look ahead of the blade. And there we go. Let's give it a test fit and see how it looks. Notch on the back, line everything up, fold these two together, and I think we have it. That looks really nice. So this time I'm going to open this up right on the canopy, and I got a couple different spots to put glue. Whatever you do, do not put glue in this area right here. We're going to focus on this back portion here, down inside, stopping and starting. This time I'm also going to put my glue here. You notice I stopped just short here so it doesn't drip down and glue it to it. Fold this in and press it firmly down against the nose, and then hold it with your fingers for about 45 seconds to a minute. Because this is so close to the fuselage, bounce it up and down once in a while just to make sure that you haven't accidentally glued it into your nose. This build technique is really amazing for advanced builds. If you guys want to design something in the future, you can get really beautiful noses, canopies, all custom fit. The important thing is to remember you have a starting point and an ending point, and flow your fit from one end to the other. Alright, our 45 seconds is over. We're ready to remove this and inspect the work. Now we can come back through and we can do any reinforcement glue that we may need. I'm going to put a bead of glue down in here. And if I need to hit any corners and shorten up anything, now's the time to do that. You can also, if you have any kind of points of resistance, like in this area here that's wanted to lift up a little bit, I can come back in here and cut a shallower angle. And just kind of clean things up. And that looks great. Now this is exciting. If you guys choose to support us by going to our store and also FT STEM, we include this decal for the canopy, along with the names Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie for you to put on the appropriate wing. We're going to go ahead and install that right now. Now if you're scratch building, you can still go to our store and get this decal kit, or you can just cut it out yourself. No need for backmask on this because it's all one piece. I'm going to start from one end, which is the very front here. Line it up right with the tip, and what I like to do is delicately take this back and just get the center established right there. You have the ability to reposition it as many times as you need before you press it down firmly. Once you press it down firmly, you're kind of committed. Next, we're going to fold down each side. This canopy decal was designed by the students as well. Did a really good job making it fit beautifully. And our last is the very front. The very front should fold over just by about 1 millimeter to make a nice smooth canopy. Now obviously if you plan on painting this, save this step for last. But now when you put this on, it looks incredible. Now if you wish, you can choose to just tape this front hatch off. This back will generally just stay tabbed in, no problem. But one thing you can do is take the remaining portion of our barbecue skewer and we can take it through the side, just like I'm going to show you right now. And right where the foam is, using like a drill bit, I'm going to pass it through. I'm going to turn this 90 degrees and show you right about the angle I want to pop it through. This kind of has to be custom fit. There's no way we can get the precision with foam board built kits to make these holes line up. So you're going to have to do this one step at a time. Once we have this going nice and horizontal, getting ready to poke through just like you see here, I'm going to make sure that my barbecue skewer is 90 degrees as you see right here. Now I'm going to go to my canopy, firmly press it down, and with a twisting motion, I'm going to go from one end to the other. Now typically I say don't go through both sides, but in this case, as long as we have it horizontal, I'm going to say keep on going to the other end. Now we don't need to pop it out the other side and have it out here. We just need on one side to pull it out, and we only need to pull it out this far. But now you can see that the canopy stays on nice and tight and it looks beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and mark this and just give a couple of indents with my pliers. You can do scissors or razor blade as well, and crack it loose. Now when we need to remove the canopy, we just simply grab this, pull this out just to where it clears, the canopy pops right off for us. And you can kind of see behind the scenes what it did here. Just went through one end to the other. If you want to make your canopy last a little longer, here's a cool trick that you can do even on other builds. Take a drop of hot glue, push it in the hole, take a scrap dowel, put it down in there, and with a twisting motion, twist it back and forth. That's going to spread the glue around inside the hole, make it much stronger, and also make it grip. You can do this trick as well on power pods that have the skewers coming out on their own, just to give it a little bit extra grip. Now that our canopy is installed and looks great, we're going to go ahead and install our battery, establish our CG, and put on the props. Let's go ahead and pop this off. For all three of our designs, the CG is almost identical, but if you have a preferred location, when you put the CG down and you find it perfect for the Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, and you interchange the wings, just make a mark on your fuselage, so that way you can put the battery right where you need it. I'm going to go ahead and lay this down right where most of them are, and that's about 1 finger length from the leading edge right here. Let's go ahead and pop on our canopy. And on the bottom here, you're going to see 2 holes. These holes are going to be what we use for balance. Now it's better to have your first flights done with a slightly nose heavy plane than a tail heavy plane. So when we put our finger on these holes, what we want to see is just a slight nose down pitch. And that looks fantastic right there. So that's going to be the marking that we're going to maiden this with. I'm going to go ahead and also put on our props right now, because now is the time to take it out for a maiden. Power this on and just confirm that our prop is moving the right direction. All right, the FT Bravo is now done. We're ready to take it outside and have some fun. All right, we are all set to go. We got a gorgeous snowy day, and that's okay because we got water resistant foam board. That's why our foam is brown. It's water resistant. We're gonna put this up into the wind. If you guys have never made something before, make sure you check out the video, 6 quick tips for a successful first flight. Friends, I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of the Flite Test family, and great job, Mesa Foam Fighters, for designing this. Now, if you haven't checked out FT STEM, there'll be lots of links down below. If you're an educator or you want to see the schools, I'd strongly recommend you look into it. We'll see you next time.